Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to this special review for a remix of the debut Judas Priest album, Rocka Rolla. This originally came out in 1974. It's now celebrating a 50th anniversary and they have remixed it and it is really cool and really different. I'm going to talk to you guys about it. I'll break it all down, get into the little ins and outs of it and that sort of stuff so you know what is going on. Only out digitally right now, came out on September 13th. Digitally, you can stream it. Physical copies you're going to be able to pick up on November 22nd, so mark your calendar. We'll get into it here in just a bit, but before we start, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also, leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by turning on notifications, you're going to stay up to date on everything going on in the world of music, just like this, with a review of the Judas Priest album Rocka Rolla, new 50th anniversary remix of it. So of course I want to jump back, give you guys a little bit of history because this album is 50 years old. Band itself though formed actually 5 years before the album came out in 69. So they've been around 55 years, which is really amazing. They're pioneers of the new wave of British heavy metal sound and were part of the formative years of traditional heavy metal along with bands like Black Sabbath and stuff like that. But the thing is, the band didn't really start off in that heavier sound the way Black Sabbath did right from the get-go. They were much more into the hard rock sound of things and tied to the 70s era of rock and things like that. So this album here, now celebrating its 50th anniversary, they decided to remix it, try to make it more the way that they had envisioned it from the get-go. Whether or not they would have had a heavier sound if the album was mixed and mastered the way that they had envisioned it or not, we'll never really know, but at least we're getting it that way now. And so the album itself was originally released on the Gull Records label and produced by Roger Bain, who had worked with Black Sabbath on their first 3 albums. And you would think a perfect choice, somebody coming from the Black Sabbath camp over into this here, but all in all, I don't think it translated quite the same way it did for Black Sabbath. Additionally, guitar player Glenn Tipton had only just joined the band, so he only contributes minimally to the writing on this album, despite having actually presented 3 songs for inclusion on the album: Tyrant, Epitaph, and The Ripper, which were all rejected as not being commercial enough. And I think that's telling in and of itself also as to where the mindset was for this first debut album, whether it be the label, producer trying to make a commercial sounding album. Album lineup is, generally speaking, the classic lineup. We've got Rob Halford on vocals, KK Downing on guitar, Glenn Tipton on guitar, Ian Hill on bass, and then the band always shifted through drummers, and we have John Hinch on this one here. He only recorded this one, the debut album for the band. Now, the album cover itself is well, I call it the classic iconic album cover, but they would replace it later on. This, the Coke bottle top with Rocka Rolla written in the style and font of Coca-Cola, was actually created for the Rolling Stones, an unnamed album by them. It was rejected and later turns up here for Judas Priest. So pretty cool. And as I mentioned, they later changed the album art in 1984 to this one here being on Koch Records reissuing it. But this was the album art that it was changed to. I still love the original art of it better. However, this is probably more fitting in line with what people expected from the Judas Priest camp at that time, coming out in 1984. But I don't know. I still think this is a far superior album cover to what they changed it to. It was recorded live in the studio. Apparently, they had a lot of technical issues at the time. Again, probably all leading to the way that the album sounds. And 3 of the songs have writing credits from the band's original lead vocalist, Al Atkins, on the songs Winter, Never Satisfied, and the instrumental closer, Caviar and Meths. Now, as I mentioned, for this here, the 50th anniversary edition of the album itself, the band has decided to remix it. They're trying to bring it into the future, into the present day of this thing. And they brought in producer Tom Olam to do that remix who worked with the band on 7 albums. And if anyone was going to do this right, it was going to be Tom. He worked on classic albums like British Steel from 1980, Point of Entry in 81, Screaming for Vengeance in 82, Defenders of Faith in 84. And while I think it's a classic album, Turbo from 86, that was a big shift musically, I know, for the band. So not everyone considers that to be part of the classic album series. Then Ram It Down in 88, which is one I actually don't really like, and Firepower in 2018. So all in all, having worked on 7 albums, Tom, definitely the right guy to bring in for this. And there's a big, big upgrade in terms of the sound of this. For me, there's definitely more punch involved in it. The instruments are more defined. There's a lot of space within the instrumentation, giving them room to breathe in here. And that seems to be a big thing that's been going on in these remixes when lots of bands are doing these now, including Black Sabbath, but other major bands out there, progressive rock bands, a lot like Yes, Jethro Tull, other artists. But that seems to be one main thing that they're doing, is trying to give the instrumentation more breadth and space in it so that it's clearer, it's not so muddy. And that's the way the original mix was for the Judas Priest album, was much more even across the board and what I would call muddy, at least by comparison to what we're hearing it as now. There was also a lot of volume discrepancy. Quiet parts were very quiet, loud parts were much louder in there, and that has been more evened out, but in a very good way, where the quiet parts have been brought up in it so that you don't get such a disparaging sound variation in it. But all in all, there's some real major differences on the track. So let's actually start breaking down each track that's in here. We can talk about the differences, some greater than others. But we're going to kick off with the first track, One for the Road. So this one here actually is 10 seconds longer than the original one. And the biggest thing about this one here is really just that punch that's in it. If you compare the two, or if you just turn this on and you know the album really, really well, right away you're going to hear that punch, that clarity. Each of the instruments within this thing now sound really, really, defined in their own space and area on it. And that's really a case for all of the songs here. So I'm not going to necessarily repeat that for everyone, but that is something that is throughout the album. Track number 2, the title track, Rocka Rolla. This one here is 20 seconds longer than the original album version. Apparently the original one was edited down for time constraints. There's a second guitar sound on it that's much more upfront in this mix here, helping to really define it, give it a harder edge. And the drums themselves are also much more upfront in this mix here. You're hearing additional cymbal crashes and things like that within it that I think all embellish and enhance the song overall. Track number 3, Winter. This one here is edited down 3 seconds. And in some cases, I'm going to point out when it's really minimal like this, and it might just be the fade out. It might just be the editing of a newer version, not really changing the sound overall. But I'm going to point out each of the little differences just so you know what's going on within it. But the intro in the beginning of this one here is much clearer and more upfront in it. And when the song hits, it's much harder, than on the original one. So there's some nice changes to this one that I think brings this song up front, making it stand out much more than it once did. This next one, track 4, Deep Freeze, is one of the ones that has a really substantial change to it here. First off, it is 7 seconds longer. Not that that's the big change. The big change is that the original version had an odd fade in, fade out effect that was happening across the guitar. That has been removed. So now the lead guitar solo that you're hearing with on this thing is all even, all up front in it. You really get to hear this thing as a proper guitar solo, the way I think it should have always been. This one here, just an absolute superior version to the original in my opinion. Track number 5, Winter Retreat. It's 3 seconds longer. There's less of that dreamy effect to it, whatever that was, and the vocals themselves sound a lot clearer on this mix. Track number 6, Cheater. This is another one that's got a major change to it. It's 2 seconds longer, but the change is that it's much more punchy and rhythmic in feel. And the harmonica that was only during the chorus before is now right from the get-go in the beginning of the song. It happens, it leads us in, and it's more prominent throughout. And I kind of wonder, where has this version been hiding for these 50 years? Or maybe it never existed and they found the guitar, the harmonica, or they took the harmonica and they mixed it in throughout. But very cool change on this song here from the original. Track number 7, Never Satisfied. It's only 1 second longer. Still a change though. The original version though feels much slower and more dirgy, and I don't think that they necessarily sped anything up. It's just how it feels to me. But the new version has much more punch, hits harder. It's got that rhythmic feel to it. And generally as a whole, I think it's less generic than the original. And this time now, again, much more defined as a song on the album. Track number 8, Run of the Mill. 13 seconds have been edited off of this. The keyboard part at the end of the song itself, which dragged out really long, that is the part that has been shortened on this. I think it was way too long from the get-go on the original version. So editing that part off of it, not so much a big change, but it just doesn't feel kind of odd at the end, holding that one note for such a long time. Fades off a lot quicker. Track number 9, Dying to Meet You, Hero Hero. 6 seconds have been edited off of this one here. It's much heavier sounding now. And this one here feels much more like a typical Priest song than some of the other things that were on here. All right, and the last one, track number 10, Caviar and Meths. This one here is another one that's got a major change on it. 7 seconds have been added to it, but again, not the major thing here. It's that the song starts right from the get-go. The original version of this has a long, almost 30-second fade in on it, and this one just right from the get-go, it kicks off. So you're actually getting a lot more song if you stop and think about how it starts right from the get-go. Same thing at the end. There's no long fade out the way there is on the original version. It just comes to a conclusion. The drums kind of continue on a bit, and the added 7 seconds are the drums fading out, but the musical aspect of it, you hear its entirety all the way throughout. And so I'm really happy with a lot of these changes on this overall. So bottom line on this here, I think the remix has really definitely breathed new life into the album as a whole, giving it a fresh new feeling. Lots of changes from the original one. Not so much that you can't enjoy the original. If you are a big fan and you loved this album from the start, it's not so much that you're not going to be able to enjoy it, but I do think that all the changes that happened on it were for the better. There's some major things in it. The biggest one being with the song like Deep Freeze and that fade in, fade out of the guitar being gone. So it's now just a straight guitar solo. That was always very weird to me. I am so glad they fixed it. For me, that broke up the album, did not allow this album to flow as well as it could have. And it was one of the reasons I did not go back to this album as a whole. Now, I didn't grow up with it. I came at it much later on. My first Judas Priest album was Painkiller, obviously very different, night and day from Rocka Rolla. But when getting back into the older stuff, especially the 70s era, that was just something that was very jarring for me. As a whole, the album much more punchy. The instruments all, as I said, given space to breathe in here. They sound much clearer in the mix. Everything as a whole, way clearer in the mix. So less of that original muddy sound. Things like the harmonica being added to Cheater, I think is just icing on the cake. All those little extra little guitar bit here or a cymbal here or something that wasn't very clear in the previous mix. In fact, for me at least, they didn't stand out at all. It wasn't until I heard this version that I go, whoa, what is that? Then I went back and I listened to the original and I said, oh, I can hear it. It is there, but it just wasn't anything that jumped out at me. So I do feel like I'm actually hearing a lot more, quote, added parts, although I think they were there. They're just really much more upfront within the mix. And all in all, I don't think that this remix is, say, going to change people's opinion about the album. Certainly not going to make it suddenly a classic album within the band's catalog, but I do think that this alternate version of the album is a nice addition and certainly something well worth putting out and using to celebrate the 50th anniversary of this album, Rocka Rolla. So there you go. That's my review of the Judas Priest Rocka Rolla 50th Anniversary Remix Edition done by Tom Allum. So glad that he was involved in this. As I said, it's out now digitally, so you can go check that out. But if you want the physical copy of this thing, you've got to wait until November 22nd, 2024. So mark your calendars because I think it's worthy addition to all Judas Priest catalogs. All right, everyone, take care. Have a good one, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.